If you don't know who Richard Cottingham and Jennifer Weiss are, and you take a look at their pictures together, you might think you're seeing a sweet moment between a grandpa and his granddaughter. Both of them are smiling, have their arms around each other. Your first thought might not be, this Santa Claus-looking man actually killed and dismembered Jennifer's mother.
Obviously, I must be sick somehow. Normal people don't do what I did.
Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you for joining today. If you, listening to the sound of my voice right now, are not subscribed, I hope you take a second to do that. Wherever you prefer to listen, find the place where you can press the subscribe button. And they don't all say subscribe, that would be too easy. You just have to use the different terminology, figure out what that is, and then find the subscribe button. It says follow, collect, things like that. But you're smart, I believe in you. Also, when you're subscribed, connect with 10-Minute Murder on the different social media platforms. I would suggest following them all because I post different things in different places. And if you want the full 10-Minute Murder experience, in the episode notes, you'll find links to all of them. And it was from one of these social media platforms that I got the request to talk about the story we're focusing on today. There are air quotes around request because it was more like a demand. I felt pressured into doing this one because I didn't really want to at this point. And that wasn't very cash money of you. There was a very recent documentary about it, and I figured I'd wait until the dust from that settled a little bit first. But here we are. And I'm mostly just kidding. I don't mind talking about it. But I will tell you, if you have seen the documentary and you know how this goes, don't spoil it for those around you or the other people in your head that maybe haven't seen it. Let's get to the story. To understand the friendship I mentioned at the beginning, we have to go back, way back to 1979, when a fire in a crappy little hotel near Times Square sickened and disturbed many of the first responders. December 2nd, firefighters were called to the Travel Inn's room number 417. As they burst in, they noticed two bodies on the twin beds. One of the firefighters had later said he tried reaching out to one of the bodies, preparing to give it mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. But the only problem was there wasn't a head attached to the body to blow into. As the smoke cleared from the room, the authorities were able to tell that both female victims had been victimized in the same way, strangled, heads and hands cut off, and set on fire. One of the victims was later identified as 22-year-old sex worker Dita Goodarzi, but the other, a 16-year-old, has never been identified. There wasn't much for the police to work with. Whoever had booked the hotel room used a fake name, of course, Carl Wilson of Merlin, New Jersey. And of course, the hotel staff could not give a proper description of the person. I'm told this is a pretty common occurrence in seedy motels. You hear and see nothing. If you're working at one of these places, you're not exactly living la vida loca. You're doing whatever you can to make ends meet, and the last thing you want is trouble with one of the guests, so you mind your business. So while the police were trying to desperately find any leads to follow, the killer struck again. On May 5th, 1980, the body of 19-year-old Valerie Ann Street was found by a housekeeper in a Quality Inn in New Jersey. She had been bitten, beaten, and strangled to death before her body was stuffed under the bed. Like Dita, Valerie was also a sex worker, and so was the fourth victim. On May 15th, firefighters were called to another hotel near Times Square. They discovered the body of a 25-year-old sex worker named Jean Rain. The killer had bitten her, severed her breasts, and cut her throat. What alarmed the authorities was that the man behind the murders, who was given the name Torso Killer for obvious reasons, was speeding up his pace. The guy was not going to stop, but maybe, just maybe, they were hoping he would eventually make a mistake. Until this moment, the authorities were all blues and no clues. The police, though, didn't need to wait too long for a screw-up. The Torso Killer was cocky enough to walk into the same hotel, Hansbrook Heights Quality Inn, that he had left one of the previous victims together with 18-year-old Leslie Ann Odell. On top of that, this guy seemed to not think about the fact that if he bites off his victim's nipple, they are possibly going to scream loud enough for somebody to hear, And of course, everyone was a little bit on edge because there was a dead woman found just weeks earlier. Violent screaming at a motel where a dead person was found not long ago is going to draw some attention. So the police were called, and after rushing into the room, they arrested 33-year-old Richard Cottingham. Richard definitely did not seem like a guy whose hobby was going out and killing sex workers and chopping up their bodies. He grew up in New Jersey, met his wife Janet in 1970, and had 3 children with her. Richard worked in New York as a computer operator at Blue Cross Blue Shield Association and appeared to be, overall, a normal person. But the truth is, Richard had dark secrets. His wife had found women's clothing, shoes, and jewelry in their basement before, and apparently Richard had an obsession with bondage and extramarital affairs. It sounds a bit like BTK Dennis Rader. And side note, what's 10-minute murder rule number 6? We don't kink shame, but only when it's consenting adults and does not lead to murder. Janet had filed for divorce at some point before, but for some reason or another, she stayed, just to learn her husband was not only unfaithful, but also a serial killer. The red flags had to be flapping in Janet's face for a long time, but love is weird. In addition to the 4 murders authorities already knew about, it was found out that Richard had killed 28-year-old X-ray technician Marianne Carr, whose body was found at the Quality Inn in 1977. But what was Richard's motive? Apparently, he was playing God. As he said years after his arrest, quote, "I was able to get almost any woman to do whatever I wanted them to do psychologically." It was godlike, almost. You're in complete control of somebody's destiny. The trials began in 1981, and by August 1984, Richard had been found guilty of 5 murders. He was sentenced to prison for hundreds of years, so it's safe to say he's never getting out. He also, BT Dubs, claims to have killed between 85 and 100 people. Unconfirmed, of course, but the case did not end here. Detective Robert Anzelot had a gut feeling that Richard Cottingham actually was responsible for more deaths, and to make the serial killer talk, he decided to take a different kind of approach. Robert invited Richard to his office, offered him pizza, and played games with him. A simple tactic that worked wonders. While Richard resisted at first, he eventually confessed to killing 6 more women between 1967 and 1974. Another person who helped uncover Richard's crimes was Jennifer Weiss, daughter of Dita Goodarzi, one of the first headless victims found in the burning motel room. Jennifer began writing letters to Richard and eventually visited him for the first time in 2017. Since then, the two have met more than 30 times. According to Jennifer, she has befriended her mother's killer to bring out the truth about his other crimes and find justice for her mother and other victims. So thanks to both Robert and Jennifer, Richard has confessed in detail to altogether 11 murders. But as I mentioned before, he claims up to 100, so we really don't have an accurate number. Richard is now 75 years old and continues to serve time in New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. As far as we know, Jennifer will keep seeing him. But finding justice is not her only motive. Jennifer is also trying to find out the truth about her own past. You see, there is a possibility that Richard Cottingham is not just a person who killed Jennifer's mother. He could also be her biological father, as if this case could not get any more twisted. Jennifer was given up for adoption by Dita when she was less than 2 weeks old, and she has never known who her father is. So when Jennifer was talking with Richard about the murders, and he mentioned that he had known Dita for 2 years before killing her, Jennifer thought, wait a minute, could this man be my father? After all, she wasn't born long before her mother's murder. For now, though, we don't know the answer to that question, but Jennifer hopes Bergen County authorities will help her organize a DNA test to finally find out if her hunch is correct.
Can you tell me why you cut off the breasts of one victim?
To do something different. I mean, she was already dead. I mean, it wasn't something that she was alive. And I wanted to create a sensationalism.
But I mean, you still have to have the balls to do this. I mean...
It's not hard. It's just a body. I mean, it's not a living person no more. Oh, I know exactly how many.
How many?
Over 85. Under 100. I was doing this for years. Hardly a week or 2 went by without something happening.
So you're saying you were killing a victim every week?
Every couple of weeks on average.
For how many years?
I can't tell you that. But well over 10.
Would you have continued to kill if you hadn't been arrested by the police?
Definitely. Definitely.
It would have been mine if it hadn't been for those meddling kids.
That's today's 10-Minute Murder. Brief and bingeable true crime. Thank you for joining today, and like I mentioned at the beginning, if this is your first episode listening to 10-Minute Murder, I hope that you will become a subscriber wherever you're listening right now. You can find links to other places to listen, more places to connect on social media in the show notes of this episode. Also, if you have friends and you think that they might be into brief true crime stories like this one, please let your friends know about 10-Minute Murder as well. Thank you for listening. Be safe and make good choices.